Hi, and welcome to another edition of Newsmakers Journal of the Vaccine Year. It is Thursday, February 4th. I'm Jerry Roberts, and we are joined this morning by Council Member Eric Friedman. Eric, I know you got a lot going on between your 32 children and your job at City Hall. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us this morning.
It's my pleasure to be here, Jerry, and it's always good to catch up with you, and looking forward to our discussion today.
Fair enough. So we have one of our final odd year elections in Santa Barbara this year. And one of the council seats that's up is yours in District 5. Are you running for re-election?
Yes, I am running for re-election for District 5.
All right. And remind us, please, the neighborhoods in District 5 and where that area is.
So it's everything on the north and west side of San Roque Road in Las Positas, basically from Arroyo Burro Beach all the way up to the foothills, and then also includes San Marcan and Mackenzie Park on the downtown side of Las Positas.
All right, good. Now, what are you telling voters in your district, or will be telling voters, or on Zoom, or however you're going to campaign this year? I have no idea how that's going to look, about why you should be reelected. What have you done in the last 4 years to merit that?
Well, I've really made government work for the people and be open and accessible. I work with anyone. I try to be responsive to not only the district constituents, but citywide. So I've taken an approach where really focusing on district issues, but also citywide issues, because I think we have to be able to do both in our city. And it's a new challenge with district elections that we didn't have in the past. But really being open and responsive, passing some of the major issues within the district, and the bread and butter issues. So we've had these extreme challenges, that the pandemic coming in during the debris flow, but we also have had to make sure that our government is still working on the day-to-day operations during those times. And so I've focused on both and been able to have successful accomplishments working with the residents in the district and the city to achieve that.
What about La Cumbre Plaza? Obviously, there were problems there economically even before the pandemic and the economy declined. What's the latest on that? What's happening there?
So with La Cumbre Plaza, the latest that my understanding is that the owners of the Sears parcel, they are working with the other owners to try to come up with an agreement of how they want to work together to go forward. And once they do that, it would come back to the city, and we've come to the city council before and saying anything that goes on there, we want to have a specific plan for La Cumbre Plaza. And that protects the public, and it allows the public to have a real say in what we want to see there in development. Whether it's housing, whether it's retail, what it is, but also address some of the impacts. So that was a direction that the council gave to our staff and to the owners of La Cumbre Plaza. So right now they're working that out, and it's really in their hands. And when they come back, then we will work on the specific plan and how we address many of the issues: circulation, open space, and all that.
If it was up to you, what would you see at that Sears site? Housing, retail, which?
I think it's a combination. I think the housing is an opportunity, but it has to be done thoughtfully and really involve the community. There are issues with the school district, the Hope School District, that could have impacts, so we would need to address those. I think we also need to look at some type of retail component and other amenities that are there, so that you can supplement the housing to really make it work. So housing will be a big part of it, but that's a discussion that we're going to have with the community. It also would allow us, in that specific parcel, would allow us to really go forward with the new state housing regional assessment needs numbers that we might talk about later.
Yeah.
To meet those. But again, it really has to involve the community from step one, and that's why I advocated for the specific plan at council, and that's the direction that it will ultimately go once the owners of the different parcels come together and bring it back to the city.
All right, yeah, big issue in District 5. Just to close on the election piece of it, what are your spies telling you? Is there anybody who's planning to challenge your re-election? You hear about anybody else running?
I haven't heard anybody at this point, no.
Okay, all right. Now, you're still chair of the Finance Committee, correct?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, okay, let's talk about the budget a little bit. Remind our viewers, what's the overall size of the budget?
So the operating budget is about 292 million, and we have about a 53 million capital budget. There's about $160 million in the general fund, which is discretionary, but within that, most of that goes towards services that we need, like public safety, goes to our parks and recs. So there's very little actual discretionary, so 160 million. We also have our reserves. We had a great reserve policy going into the pandemic, which really helped us out to continue the services that we need in city government. It's a 15% disaster contingency and a disaster reserve and a 10%
So
contingency,
15% of
the operating budget.
the general fund.
Yeah, the operating budget. So in the reserves were about 35 million that we had. And prior to this, it was a debate on whether we really needed that. But as we've seen during the unprecedented pandemic, it really helped us because we were able to have those reserves. We still have our disaster contingency, which is right now at about $20 million. But we were able to use our contingency fund about 15 million, and we've pretty much gone through that in order to maintain the services, even with the reductions in expenditures, the 5% reductions that we had, we still had to rely heavily on the contingency. And because of that, we're in much better shape than a lot of municipalities are.
But looking out, revenues are down, are they not substantially?
Yes, they are. The three main revenues that we have for the general fund are property tax, which is about 38 million. And then we also have the sales tax, which is coming in at about 22 million. And it's less than it was pandemic, but as we did the budget, the sales tax is about in line, even with reductions where we thought it would be. But the real challenge is going to be the transient occupancy tax. That's coming in a couple $1 million or so under. It's about 17 million. We also have Measure C funding, which is very similar to our sales tax. There's a slight difference, so that's also at about 22 million. And pre-pandemic, they were a few $1 million more than that. So we do have those challenges in revenue. And as we've seen, we don't know, it changes month to month, week to week on what we're able to do. We just went through a stay-at-home order, which significantly affected what we're able to do. So we are looking at basically tightening the ship, tightening that belt again. We're looking at, for this year, a projected $4 million or so deficit for this fiscal year, which we'll be able to manage again using reserves and being strategic and not filling positions. And then we also have a projected 8 million or so deficit going into next year, which we're going to manage, and we're working on that, and that will be addressed. How we address that is going to come up in the coming weeks and months as part of our budget deliberations for the fiscal year 22.
We still don't have a budget director though, right, on city staff?
No, we do have Keith DeMartini. He is the new finance.
Okay.
Yeah, he's been there and he's great. And he's been working well with us.
He's not acting. He has now taken the position formerly held by Bob Samario.
Correct. No, he is the hire, and he's been here for he started actually late last year, so he's been here a few months now, and I think very highly of him, and he really knows his stuff. So.
Okay, good. How many employees do we have? How many city employees?
Just about 1,000 or so employees, and of all different and all the different departments.
Yeah, and what's the average cost of an employee?
Well, that really varies depending on the employee. Public safety do cost more for a lot of reasons, and depending on the other departments. I mean, we have our park staff, we have our public works staff, so it's really specific to each department.
And what have there been layoffs in connection with the downturn, the pandemic downturn? Are you looking at layoffs? Where does that stand?
Not at this point. We were able to balance the budget last year with all the departments coming in with a 5% cut per department. And then going forward, we're going to be looking at how we can strategically make necessary adjustments, such as not filling positions, more efficiencies, work with our labor groups to fill those gaps. I think when we start getting into cutting individuals, we end up reducing the level of service to the public. So we need to be very careful if we do have to get to that point. But I think there are certain measures we can take that will prevent that and allow us to balance the budget without having to dip into the reserves as much as we currently are. So there are ways to address the upcoming gaps that we're trying to do and working with our labor groups to do that.
All right. And salaries and benefits, pension costs and so on, What does that represent as a percentage of the overall budget? About 80, 85%, something like that?
It gets up there in that high range. I'm not sure the exact percentage, but I think it's close to in the 70s. I believe it is. And those are just costs, prior contracts that we're working to try to address and looking forward. So that is a concern going forward on it. But again, we're working with our labor groups to try to address those issues. All that has to be done through collective bargaining. The council can't take collective action on any one item.
Yeah. And what percentage of the budget is represented by pension costs, which is a thing that I hear from a lot of people they're very concerned about.
I don't know the exact percentage, but I do know that there is a significant general fund cost that is rising over the next few years in the millions of dollars. Because if you go back to the CalPERS, the state changed the formula for the discount. And the discount is what we expect the market rate of return is. So it got reduced by not quite a full point, but it phased in over time. And that adds millions of dollars each year to local municipalities for what they're expected to pay. So it is going up, and it's going to keep going up through 2026, 2027, where we're going to be spending additional millions each year. So that's why it's also important that we're very strategic in what we spend now, and that we are able to maintain our reserves, and if we can start building them up, because that's a balance we have. So those costs are very real, and they are concerning, but at the same time they're past contracts, so we are making adjustments on that.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of litigation in other cities about, whether those pension costs can be cut or not cut. And I know the city has taken some steps in terms of a sort of a two-step workforce and so on. Is there anything else that can be done, or is there anything else that you're looking at? Because I don't want to get dramatic and say it's an existential threat, but it's kind of an existential threat to the budget of the city, to the finances of the city, if you start looking 10, 15, 20 years out, is it not?
I think there are challenges with it. I don't necessarily know if it's an existential threat. I think by taking it seriously now and taking in the measures we need to do in terms of looking at when we're hiring new positions, what are the impacts of that? I also think that then Governor Brown's Public Employees Pension Reform Act that was in, I think it was 2012, if I recall correctly, that over time, it's already saving municipalities because we have that two-tiered that you just mentioned. But as we go forward, we're going to have more employees that fall within that, so that the pension liabilities are reduced, but we're still able to have a pension that, you work for many years and you have that dignity to retirement. But I think we're able to address some of the issues that led to this, such as one of the things I was addressing was pension spiking and those types of things. And our employees understand the severity of it too. And they're working with us, such as cost sharing on their pensions. But again, that has to be done through collective bargaining with each different employee unit. But that's something that our employee units are aware of, we're aware of, because we want to make sure that we're able to provide the services to the public, and that we're able to have that services available.
But on the pensions, the trend line is definitely up going into the out years, and it may, not be as sharp going forward. But there's nothing really that we're looking at right now in terms of steps the city has or can take that's going to flatten that out, is there?
At this point, again, we're working with our labor groups overall in a long-term strategy to it. But in terms of flattening that curve, it's a cost that every municipality everywhere has because of that discounted rate and funding it up more front. So that's one of the ways we address it now, is by making it more solvent, is to put that extra additional funding towards it, which is what the lowering the discount rate is helping us do. So the more we can fund it now, it reduces that liability later, and it gets us more on solid footing. So those steps, and just being fiscally prudent and working with our labor groups for concessions is the path we have right now.
All right, let's talk about labor groups a little bit, because the council last week approved finally this project labor agreement system, which requires union labor to be used on capital projects, public works projects of the city above a certain a cost. Why did you vote on behalf of the union bosses instead of local businesses? Was it just because of the campaign contributions you get from them?
Well, I disagree with the phrasing of that question, Jerry, but I know you're a big fan of the PLA yourself. So So I did bring this forward with Greg Hart, and the reason I support this is I think you and I can both agree, and many people out there, especially during the pandemic, I think we've seen is that having access to high quality benefits, including healthcare, including pension benefits, is a must for our community and our workforce. It's something we value as a community. And when you look at what the proposal that came forward is it is over $5 million projects. And there are very, very few numbers of projects that actually come through. If you look at information that was presented by staff at one of our council meetings about a year and a half ago in 2019 or so, from 2004 to 2019, there were only 19 projects that would have even triggered the project labor agreement. And then even within that, you're talking about there were some that went to union contractors, there's some that went to outside contractors, and there were some that went to non-union. So the number of jobs that we're talking about here for the non-union contractors is very small over a 15-year period. It's a handful. And even for anyone else, it's about one project a year. And from 2014 to 2019, if you take away the $5 million limit just on projects in general, we had 122 types of public works projects. So the percentage is very small. But the reason that the project labor agreement and why I supported it is critical is because it's the only way that we can prioritize our local workforce to be on jobs that are above $5 million. And the higher the dollar value of the job, the more likely we are to get outside bidders from out of the county, from the Bay Area, from Los Angeles, even out of state to come in on projects. And we cannot require them to have local workforce unless we have a project labor agreement. And one project in particular, which I think is going to demonstrate this, is the police station that's coming. You have a very high value project that's very project specific, and it's got very specific types of qualifications. And I expect, and our staff does too, that we're going to get bids from far and wide on this. And if an outside bidder were to come in and win that, we have a mechanism now through the project labor agreement that no matter who gets it, whether it's someone from Arizona, from San Jose, or Los Angeles, our local workforce gets the priority when they come here. That's why the $5 million is key, and that's why it's on these larger projects.
Well, but when you talk about local, you're really talking about Tri-County. You're talking about Ventura, SLO, and Santa Barbara County. You're not talking about the city of Santa Barbara workers here.
No, we are, because there's a tiered system. So the first tier that goes in is City of Santa Barbara. That's the first priority. So if there are workers available who live in City of Santa Barbara, they get bumped up to the first of the list. Then it goes to the County of Santa Barbara, then it goes to the Tri-Counties. But let's also remember that a lot of our critical workforce that already works here in the City of Santa Barbara live in these areas, such as Lompoc, Santa Maria, Ventura, and many of them were residents that grew up here that can no longer afford to live here. So by saying that Ventura, there are people who grew up in Santa Barbara who live in Ventura who would be considered part of the local workforce.
But you sat there and heard Lee Cushman and a number of the other local contractors who have been building projects for the city and the county here for decades, many of them, very established businesses, saying this is going to hurt us. If it's not going to put us out of business, but it's definitely going to hurt us. I mean, how could you have been non-responsive to their concerns?
I wasn't non-responsive. I met with them and I tried to hear them out, and that's where the 5 million, that was part of it, is trying to take in those considerations. So again, a vast majority of projects aren't even triggered by the project labor agreement, and they could still bid on the projects. And in other areas, non-union contractors do bid on the projects. So again, under $5 million, which is well in excess of 90% of projects that we have in the city, are not even affected by this.
Well,
and
yeah. I'm sorry, finish your thought.
Oh, and I was to say, and the higher the number, the higher dollar value of the project, the more likely we are to get outside bidders coming in. And that's what we really need, because say, for example, the police station, I'll use that as an example. We have an $80 million project estimated, or whatever it's going to cost, but somewhere in that ballpark. If we didn't have this and an outside bidder comes in, that's $80 million of our money that we have no way to prioritize local workforce on it.
But you know as well as I do that this is not just happening in the city of Santa Barbara, even the county of Santa Barbara, where Greg Hart, did it out the door on the council, and then, took it up as his first order of business on the county. It's happening all over the state. isn't it a fact that the reason that there's a push for the PLA throughout municipalities in California is because these crafts unions see a lot of their members beginning to retire. Their health and safety funds, their pension funds are all going down, and they need money to fill them up. That's what this is really about, isn't it?
I think you'd have to talk to them about the status of their funds. I don't know about their
Oh,
funds. I'm not a
you
financialist
haven't
like
heard
that.
that, huh? That's news to you.
Well, they haven't presented to me. I haven't studied the union pension fund. But what I'm saying also though is that when you talk about supporting our middle class, we have the union benefits are typically and in most cases better than anything else in terms of healthcare and pensions.
But if
And
I'm not
so,
working, it doesn't matter whether I'm getting benefits or not. These guys that have been working for Cushman and the others who may be pushed out by somebody from SLO or somebody from Ventura.
but
Who the
some of
union
those employees working
sends
for
out.
them could be working in living in Ventura too. Like I said, that's where the $5 million threshold is so key, is because it exempts almost over 90% of projects in the city.
All right, I could argue with this all day, but let me just ask you one more question.
I know, so could we, but thank you. So next question, Jerry.
No, but let me just close with this. You and others, led by the mayor, have received large campaign contributions from the very unions that are directly benefiting from this. Don't you think it would have been wise and put to rest the concerns that many people have about a pay-to-play environment, that you would have said, I refuse to take any further campaign contributions from these unions that are directly benefiting from my vote and my support of this?
Well, I think if you're going to argue that, then you have to really look at campaign finance reform in general, because to say that unions aren't on there.
Why can't you just say this? There's so much controversy about this. There's a limited number of unions. It's only what, 6, 8 unions. Why don't you just say, I'm not going to take any money from the electricians, from the plumbers, from the laborers, from the steam fitters, and then there won't be any question about it.
Well, I support middle class jobs, and that's what unions support.
So you're going to continue to take money from them, is what you're saying.
I'm saying I support middle class. I support middle class jobs. I look at the current situation we're in terms of people needing strong healthcare and strong pension benefits. And those are the values. I think you share those same values, Jerry, of having strong healthcare and strong pension benefits. You were a union guy once, right?
I've been
So,
and you, for many years.
Yeah.
But why don't the unions organize in the private sector? Why is it only always the public sector, where they can eliminate the middleman and just take the money from the treasury and then give a little bit back to the elected officials who vote for their interests?
I think the building trades do go out into the private sector, and they do work in the private sector.
Oh yeah, what percentage? Well, about 6% of is in the private sector. It's all public sector unions. All right, let me ask you about something else. Let's talk about the pandemic. It seems to me there's been this kind of conflict since the beginning of the pandemic in terms of the city's approach between enforcement and education. And I'm talking specifically about masks. And you've been one who has been more on the side of education than enforcement. Why?
Well, I think we have to be very thoughtful and deliberative on mask enforcement. The reason is that there are a lot of nuances in there, and there's a lot of individuals, as we've seen, who really are hesitant to do that. And so I think the unintended consequences would be that you could have protests. I think we've seen it in other areas. And that in itself, if you have protests without masks that come in, then that could lead to it. You also have to look at where the virus is actually spreading the most. And so I think educating people to keep their distance, to wear their masks, to properly sanitize is a key there. We do allow for enforcement. I think that we do have to have enforcement at appropriate times. And when it's examples of this, so like say you're going to a grocery store and there might be a person who's not wearing a mask and refuses, of course, you'd have enforcement come up and deal with that issue. I don't think we should leave it to our businesses on that. But when you look at the numbers, especially recently, when the stay-at-home order was here, the businesses were shut down and we had the highest numbers we ever had. We went from back in the summer, we were talking about 30 or 40 a day, and we were getting 300, 400, even more a day. And that's where there is a large concern by a large number of people, both here throughout the state and in our country, of enforcement. And so education is the best possible approach so that people understand, because that's where it gets to be a very complex issue, is if we know that many or a vast majority of cases are happening in people's homes, it becomes very difficult to enforce. So education is a big part of it. And so that's why I've always taken that approach. I'm not opposed to enforcement. I do support it in instances where we need to have it. If there's instances, in open places where it can be. But keep in mind that we need people to be outdoors practicing all this, the social distancing and practicing all the safe protocols, because the more difficult we make it to be outdoors, the unintended consequence would be that people move indoors. So it's a fine balance on there.
But you compared it last summer to Nazi Germany. You took a lot of heat for that. Wasn't that kind of over the line?
One is, I would just say that I would like to just use that to say that I blundered on that one. I'll admit it. I blundered on that one. Nick Welsh got it right in his article, that I was tired. I think I was exhausted just like everybody else was. We were about 5 months into it. And I didn't compare it to Nazi Germany. I related a conversation that a Jewish relative of mine had, and I was trying to make the point I just made, Jerry, which is that when you talk about enforcement, and the data and the science show that a vast majority of it was happening indoors, that's what we had to be cognizant about. And yeah, I made a blunder. I did not articulate it well, but that's the point I was trying to make, was that we really need to be thoughtful and articulate. The other component of it too is that we have to have a consistent enforcement approach with our local neighboring jurisdictions, such as the county sheriff. So if we have a certain protocols here, but the county sheriff isn't following them, and all of a sudden you have different rules on different sides of the street, literally, it makes it confusing for the public, and it just creates an uncertainty there. So that's the point I was trying to make. And I admit when I did not make it clear, and I should have used another example, and I take responsibility for that. But at the end of the day, the point I was trying to make is it's complex, and we need to be very thoughtful about our approach to it.
All right, fair enough. So let's talk about housing a little bit. You mentioned earlier the RENA numbers. These are the state numbers that come down that are sort of a little bit short of mandates or for what local government needs to do. And I believe the number is somewhere over 8,000 for Santa Barbara County, about 4,000 maybe for the city. Are those realistic?
Actually, I'm gonna change that a little bit. Currently, the cycle that we've been in is 4,100 for the city of Santa Barbara.
Okay.
The county is 18,000 projected, and the city of Santa Barbara is 8,000. So it's
8,000.
actually worse than you thought. So it's actually 8,000.
Worse than I stated, yeah.
Yeah. So it is a significant challenge on how we're going to get there. But I've taken the approach that we need to build housing where appropriate, at the right densities in certain areas. I also think we need to really be thoughtful and fight to protect what makes Santa Barbara Santa Barbara. And in some cases, in particular, I've worked well with Councilmember Sneddon and Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez when we had the discussion about, with the Joint Planning Commission hearing about where we want to upzone to try to meet these numbers. At the time, this was over 6 months ago, I can't recall exactly, but to try to upzone before we had these numbers was something that I didn't feel was appropriate, and my colleagues didn't. And also, we need to have a better community dialogue on what it means to upzone and where, because once we upzone properties, you can't go back anymore. And by that, I mean the state now has a no net loss provision. So if you try to reduce, you can't unless you're able to offset those units. So once you upzone, you really limit your options in terms of protecting your neighborhoods, but also the ability to build in a thoughtful and productive way. And the other component of it is that the state laws are constantly changing on us to take away local control and authority as a cookie cutter approach by the state. So the more that we can show that we're building housing, which I voted for projects that have gone forward, the more that we maintain that local control. Because I think the biggest mistake we can make is just to upzone to try to make the numbers, and the state still comes in and says we're not meeting the actual production. So we've upzoned and we've lost our local control. So that's why I think we do have differences of opinion on the council on how to get there. But I think in terms of downtown, prioritizing downtown, and then really looking, we talked about La Cumbre Plaza, how that would fit in there in a thoughtful way.
All right. We've had the, I guess, the formation commission for the new police review structure, whatever it's going to be, has been selected after the council interviewed, 48, 50 people, something like that. But I was kind of interested, Lori Luna, the outgoing police chief, when she gave her report the other night, she talked about, I don't know, 49,000 or how many incidents the police responded to. There was only one case where there was an injury inflicted by a member of the force. What do you think the purview of this civilian oversight ought to be?
So the formation commission that we just appointed, I think it's for that group to go out and look at what other communities have done in terms of police oversight. What are the models out there? What are the differences that are out there? And then how can we tailor it to what our needs here? So also understanding what the challenges are here. That's what the formation commission that we just went through, and they're gonna have about a year to do that. I think ultimately, the oversight commission, when it gets implemented, is a way to build trust between historically disenfranchised groups and our police department. And I think that having that oversight and that accountability, and I think that ultimately it benefits our police officers and it benefits the community because you're able to have that building of trust coming in there, that each side has a place at the table when issues arise.
Do you think there is systemic racism in the Santa Barbara Police Department?
I think our police officers do a great job protecting our city and serving our city, and we ask them to do a lot of things that are not typically in the realm of policing. I think overall that throughout our society, there are structures that have systemic racism and they purview down, but the individual members, I think, are part of a system nationwide, not just in policing, but in other structures. An example would be if you have a homeless individual who has maybe mental health or codependency issues, who is on the street and a business is opening and that person's there, why do we call police to come and get that person? Why don't we have another way to come and get that person up and an outreach worker or whatever it is, social service worker or mental health worker that comes and makes that contact? We ask a lot of our police officers and we don't give them the tools to train, such as mental health or others. And one of the things we passed in the budget, which I think was a great way forward, and I think our police department supports this. I know our police department supports it. Chief Luna supported it, was the co-response with the county. And that's where we have an officer that is paired with a behavioral wellness worker from the county that's licensed in mental health practitioner. And whenever there is a crisis call mental health, they come together and the police officer is there in case of any safety reasons, but the behavioral wellness mental health professional is there to de-escalate the situation. It leads to a better outcome for the families and for the person in mental health. It takes a quicker amount of time to do the call because you're able to de-escalate it rather than having it go out of control. So those are the types of things I think we need to look at in terms of being more humane, in terms of the resources. And ultimately, it would allow our police to focus on the essential functions of policing if they're not out there dealing with homeless related calls or other types of calls.
So among the structures in society, which you just referenced, are affected by systemic racism, would you include the Santa Barbara Police Department?
I think it's an overall structure. I don't think the individuals are in
Is
there.
that a
I think,
yes? Is that yes?
yeah, it's part of the whole structure of our society. But in terms of the management and the individual, no. I think that they are part of a system, and I think that they are doing a lot to go out and change that perception. And I think the Oversight Commission is a part of building that trust. We have the new community resource officers that Chief just explained that we're going to be out in the community. So those are the types of things. So I think overall, when we look at our systems and all of us that are in the systems, we can all do better. And that's a path that we're going forward on for all of us.
All right. All right. Enough with the issues. We got one more, just a couple of minutes. Let me ask you about politics a little bit. So among the elections this year, obviously, is the mayor's race as well. Are you endorsing Kathy Murillo for re-election?
Well, at this time, I am not making an endorsement at this time. When I took time over the holidays when we we're at home, all of us stayed home. did the shutdown, I really thought about it and thought about the fact that we now, the mayor, every 4 years is the one time our city comes together now and really looks at our candidates. So I'm interested to hear what the mayor is going to present. I'm interested to hear what other candidates out there, Deborah Schwartz, James Joyce, and others who get in there, get in the race. So I am right now am not making an endorsement at this moment, and I may or may not at some point.
And on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being, oh, say, Fiorello LaGuardia, and 1 being a vacancy, how would you rate the job that Kathy Marino has done as mayor?
Well, Jerry, you know I'm a history guy, so give me a pop math quiz. Come on now, that's not fair.
5? Higher than 5, lower than 5? Let's, cut it right in the middle.
It's hard to rate somebody. I think she's had her successes and challenges just like we all have. It's been a very challenging time, not just from the pandemic, but our 3 years on here. So I think ultimately the voters will make that decision.
But, as the most important thing the mayor does is run the meeting, set the agenda, and try to bring consensus together on the council. But it's no secret that the council is really pretty badly divided on personalities, on politics, on factions, and so on and so forth. So she's kind of failed in that venue, has she not?
Well, like I said, I think she's had some successes. I think she's had challenges just like we all have. I've worked myself to try to build bridges with all of our colleagues, and I know she has tried. And so again, that's why right now I'm not making an endorsement, and I'm interested to see what she presents and what other candidates do as well.
Fair enough. All right, Eric Friedman, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us and for putting up with me. I really appreciate it, and we'll be talking to you again as we go forward in the campaign, and also as you deal with some of these very intractable issues. And thank you for your service.
Thank you, Jerry. Always good to catch up with you, and love the spirited conversations. Thank you.
Take care.